Can you
Hello,
hear
hi
me?
Jenny. Yep, it looks good. Um, this is Jenny's first time at Laracon Online, so it's great to have you here.
Yeah, hi
And
everyone. This is the biggest crowd I have ever spoken in front of,
right,
2,600. Wow, that's amazing.
yeah, it's gonna be it's wild because it's 2,600 people, but yet you're just talking to your monitor, so it is a little bit weird. But they're out there. I see them. I see the numbers continuing to go up. So have a great talk, and I will see you at the end. Take it away.
Yeah. All right, so really excited to be here at Laracon Online. Like to take you all away from the technology itself onto, up in the cloud, something on the more, idea, conceptual level and more inspirational level. I like to talk about a concept that is designing for users of different cultures. While this might not relate to Laravel, the technology itself, but it is related to the product and service that you are developing. So I like to kind of take you through my journey of how I get to design for users across multiple cultures. So I was born in Taiwan and moved to Canada when I was 12. And since 2012, I lived and worked in different countries, from India to Singapore to United States to the Netherlands. Right now, I'm back based in Taiwan. And so I kind of have this, interest and curiosity for multiple cultures, and I really like to live abroad to really absorb the local, culture and understanding. And so far I have traveled to, a lot of countries, lived in 6, and I have the opportunity and pleasure to work with a lot of clients designing for users of multiple countries, for users around the world. Some of the really interesting projects I have, including designing for Japanese market and e-commerce fashion, designing for furniture for the Southeast Asian market, designing for the Middle East for a financial company, and designing for Brazil, that is a accommodation platform. So to go back to the topic of cross-culture design, before we do that, we have to kind of understand what is culture to begin with. There are a lot of different definitions, and I'd like to show you a study done by a cultural social psychologist that is here at Whole State. And so he has this research called the cultural dimensions. So he analyzed culture into 6 different dimensions. That is power distance, individualism, masculinity, femininity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. So you can see here on this chart is how my home country, Taiwan, compares to the United States. So you can see that there's a lot of difference in, for example, individualism, and in pretty much every aspect it's different. There's a lot of difference in the cultural dimensions, and I will mention a couple of them later in the talk. And I also would like to show you a study done by Aaron Meyer about culture, and I think it can kind of help us prepare for how to design for users of different cultures.
You might be a star negotiator in your own country, but in today's global economy, your skills may not automatically translate to other cultures. For instance, in some cultures, it's entirely appropriate to show emotion during a negotiation, to raise your voice, laugh passionately, or even put a friendly arm around your counterpart. In others, this much expression not only feels intrusive or surprising, but may be viewed as immature or unprofessional. Then there's open disagreement. Negotiators often assume that more expressive cultures are also more confrontational, but that isn't always the case. In some countries, such as France and Israel, emotions pour out, including disagreement. But for other very expressive cultures, such as Brazil, Mexico, and Saudi Arabia, open disagreement could be seen as insulting. Some less expressive cultures, such as Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands, see open disagreement and debate as positive and necessary, as long as it's expressed calmly and factually. Others tend to be both less emotional and non-confrontational, which means you'll have to be especially attuned to subtle cues for both positive and negative responses. It's also important to learn how others build trust. There are two distinct types, cognitive and affective. And in a business setting, the dominant type of trust varies from one culture to another. Cognitive trust is task-based. It comes from the head and is built on your counterpart's accomplishments, skills, and reliability. American culture offers a good example of this kind of trust. In the United States, getting too emotionally close to a business counterpart is seen as unprofessional, and mixing the personal and professional is seen as risky. Affective trust is relationship-based and comes from the heart. It arises from the feelings of emotional closeness, empathy, and friendship that are developed gradually through sharing meals, evening drinks, and coffee breaks. In China, for instance, negotiators are unlikely to trust their counterparts until an effective connection has been made. Adapting your negotiation approach accordingly will help you get to yes, or si, ya, oui, hi, and da.
So that is Erin Meyer's research on culture differences. Now you might be wondering, well, what does it have to do with my work? I know that we have a really international audience over here, and usually when I'm giving a talk in person, I like to ask where people come from, and ask people to talk about some of the interesting things from the culture. But in terms of culture differences, why is it relating to us? We can think about what Elisa Delgado and Jacob Nielsen, the author of International User Interfaces, say. It is no longer enough to simply offer a product translated in 10 to 20 different languages. Users also want a product that acknowledges their unique cultural characteristics and business practices. So let's talk about how to apply this knowledge in real design and development projects. How can we actually design for users for different cultures? We can look at how culture affects product design, and take Netherlands, for example, a country like that I lived for 3 years. We can see that according to Geert Hofstede, this is their Dutch cultural dimensions. They score high in individualism, long-term orientation, as well as indulgence. And what I mean is that the Dutch culture, according to Geert Hofstede, is they are pragmatic, and in the culture, thrift is encouraged, and efforts in modern education is to prepare for the future. So they are thinking long term, and there is this strong propensity to save and invest. And the culture is much more about perseverance in achieving results. So pragmatic and strong will to save and invest. And how I actually come to learn about this culture is in early on in one of my projects at Travelbird. It is an online travel agency based in Amsterdam, and in this project I was tasked to design for the online travel agency a form to ask the user for their passport details, because we need this user details in order to book them the flight and hotel. And here the issue was here that users was filling in their nicknames, was filling in their initials, which were not the name in their passport. So we have to call them to ask them to get the name and things like that. So here I added a label that says, make sure your name matches the one in your passport. If your name is not correct, it will lead to refusal at the gate, which means they cannot board a flight. And I added a passport icon. So I thought that this probably is obvious enough that user will actually get their passport and fill in the right details. And we launched a design, we tracked it for 2 weeks, and we found that it did not help at all. And I was really puzzled. So I went to look up how other travel agencies and flight company does this. So I found Transavia, which is a flight carrier in the Netherlands, and here they have this big box that says, please fill in all passenger details, and it says, as a user, pay €4 now, and you can change the details. But if you want to change the name later, you have to pay the €50. And that was the first time that I see this pattern. So I thought that it kind of echoes to the cultural characteristic of being pragmatic, of being persevering for the future, that they would rather that they will only do this if they know that there's a penalty of not doing this right. as you know, users are like lazy. They kind of take the easiest path possible. So I learned that this would have worked for the Dutch audience. And another culture that I have experience designing with is Germany. And according to the here host data culture dimensions, the Germany culture scores high on long-term orientation, certainty avoidance, masculinity, and individualism. And the summary given here is that in the German culture, the systematic overview has to be given. And in a law system is also very systematic, and that details are important to create certainty, and something has to be very well thought out. And how I realized it again is designing for Travelbird, as it was a travel agency targeting 17 countries in Europe. So the on the Travelbird website, when user is browsing a particular travel package, we offer them a calendar. So they can select the date and move on through booking. So here is a page for booking the deal for the Dutch market. Now this is the page for the German market. So you might notice some difference if you catch it quick enough. The difference here is that there's a long list of inclusive and exclusives, as well as the trust badges on the bottom. So the inclusive and exclusive tells the user what is included in a package and what is not included in a package. And this exclusive list is typically not shown on e-commerce website, because if you go to a website and it tells you, well, it is not this, it does not include breakfast, you have to pay extra for the children's bed, you have to pay extra for this, and typically we would think that it will push the user away from booking. But then when we look at the data for the German market, we actually tested it. We found that having this detailed information about what is included and what is not included actually increases the user's trust of the brand, of the company, and encourages booking. And also the trust badges is something that's very common on German e-commerce website. And we found that adding these definitely has been positive towards the conversion rate. Another cultural specific pattern and differences is something that we typically don't expect. So here you see the hamburger menu and the kebab menu, and people like us who work in tech, we know what that means. We know what tapping on the three dots will show more options or show the menu. But in terms of the Chinese market, what we see is totally different. You don't see the hamburger menu or you don't see the kebab menu. What you see instead is a discovery icon that takes form as a compass. And that is actually very commonly seen on Chinese apps. So you can see on a lot of popular apps like Tencent, like Weibo, there's this discover menu that tells the user tap here for more options. And that is a totally different concept from what we're used to with the hamburger and the kebab. And that's actually, that kind of makes sense, because hamburger and kebab are not Chinese to begin with. And here discover icon tells the user tap here for more options. And also there's this pattern for the Chinese market that is quite interesting. So here you have the Firefox homepage for the American market, and it looks like really simple. It looks very minimal, and there's this clear big call to action button that tells user, okay, click here to download Firefox. Really easy as that. But when you look at the Chinese version, it looks totally different. There's a lot of content, there's a lot of banners, and there are search, and they are just really a lot of different things. And in case you're wondering, the green button is not to download, it's to post in the forum. And design strategists at Mozilla actually went to research why there's such a big difference. So Brent Pitoyo, he looked at the top sites. He compared the top sites in China and in the United States. He looked at the top sites and found that, okay, the number one site is the search engine optimized for searching, which is Google and Baidu. But when you look at the other sites, sites that are optimized for browsing, like Yahoo, Sina, Sohu, QQ, they actually look very different from Google and Baidu. So they have this content portal, that kind of newspaper layout with a lot of informations and banners and images. So Brent has this hypothesis, or at least has this insight, that perhaps it is due to the input method. It may mean that typing Chinese takes a long time and finding the precise word isn't easy. So if search sucks, that's optimized for browsing. And some of the hypotheses why Chinese websites tend to be very content rich and not optimized for searching might be because of different interpretation of personal space. In the Chinese culture, people are more used to crowded places and images, and they like to have a lot of choices. They are able to absorb more information. And this is just the way that the culture is. And that it could also mean that older generation are not familiar with hidden links, and they like to have, instead of multiple levels, they like to have everything bring to the forefront, everything very, all the visual information very direct. So that is the hypothesis. And the next thing that we can learn about in terms of designing for users of different culture is to look at the quantitative data. So they can actually give you some clues about the culture. So one of the clients I work with is desk bookers, and they offer meeting and workspaces. And I was tasked to help them increase the conversion rate for Germany. So this is the site I have been analyzing, and then I looked at analytics, and I found that while a lot of users use the search bar, they were searching for the city, they were looking for meeting spaces in Munich and Frankfurt. We also saw that a lot of clicks on the company related information. So I began to hypothesize about why users were looking up the company and not actually searching up the working and meeting spaces. So my hypotheses were that the user would like to know about the company before using the service, which means that the user are not really trusting the company. The second thing is there's not enough information on the homepage, so the user would then click help to get more information before using the application. So we see that the two issues here were lack of trust as well as lack of information, which echoes the culture insight that I talked about previously from here at Hofstede, is that German users value detail, they like certainty, and they really care about a topic being well thought out. So with those hypotheses, I redesigned the website to include more information. That includes of course, the trust badges, and also include logos of German customers, review from German customers, and what payment methods we accept. And then instead of having just links to about, we are revealing more information about a real address and real email and phone number that the user can trust that we are a real company. And these changes actually help the conversion rate to increase significantly, which means that the hypotheses were true, that it was due to the lack of trust and information that the users were not really converting through the website. And one thing to understand about cultural nuances is also research. Now, as a designer and as a strategist, I research about culture a lot before I dive into the project, before I dive into any design details. So how do I get all those market and culture insights to design for a different market? So this is my process, it's what I do as a cross-cultural UX consultant. So definitely the Hofstede country comparison tool is a resource for people to just even read about countries and the culture and get this dimensions analytics and get this summary. So that is definitely something I will start with, a place I will start with to learn more about a culture. And what I also do aside from that is I do a lot of secondary research. So I read things like reports, and then I research on any statistics, and of course, Wikipedia, and I read a lot of white papers. And some of the research I've done for past clients, including looking at specific industries, and looking at local and international competitors, looking at the the devices, stats, and things like that. And one tip I have here is to research in a local language instead of English or your own language. That is probably hard to do unless you speak multiple languages, which is why if you speak multiple languages, that gives you a really good advantage to design users of different cultures. And why researching a local language, I have one example here is that I have an American client and they were designing for users in Taiwan. And then he was looking up things like the top brands and any mobile behavior, fashion, and he was looking up all the keywords, but he was looking English and he couldn't find much information. And then he asked me to do the research. Of course, I typed in Chinese and I found really a lot of information. So if we had gone with just English speaking team and trying to do research for Taiwanese market in English, we would not be able to move forward that much. So of course, if you can have a team member that speak a local language to do the research, it will give you a really big head start. And of course, we cannot skip primary research like ethnography studies in person or remote user interviews and UX research. So I spend time talking with users in person. Now I can't. I mean, at least for international users. So I do it remotely via video. I do it like with surveys. Try to understand the market. So that is definitely really helpful because then even via video, you can still get a lot of insights from the users themselves. Always don't skip talking to your users if you're designing for international market, because you'll find that a lot of the culture differences is not. It definitely goes beyond what you can learn from things like analytics. So that is definitely very valuable if you have the resources to conduct the research. And this part is about applying the insights into design, because we talked about using analytics, we talked about doing user research, and now how do you actually apply those insights into the product? And I'm not talking about basics like translations, text directions, or time, date, currency, format. Those were the basics of localization. I'm talking about beyond the basics. So what kind of things should you localize if you design for a product and service that involves transaction? You definitely need to localize the payment methods, because not every country defaults to credit card like North America, even in Europe. So if you're from Europe, you probably would know the local payment methods of your own country. I'd like to talk about some of the interesting differences of different countries. Like in India, cash and checks are used 85%. And only 15% is for something else. Romania is one of the biggest e-commerce markets in Eastern Europe, and they also primarily use cash on delivery specifically. And in Mexico and Brazil, installments are one of the primary way to pay, because like low income and things like that, and user typically actually pay installment rather than everything up front. And for Germany, you have the direct debit, you have the SOFOR, and you have GiroPay. And despite that, 50% of online retail purchases, most popular are the direct debit. It's actually not credit card. For in China, you probably are familiar with WeChat, Alipay, and UnionPay. And China is the biggest retail e-commerce market in the world. And and for Japan, you still have cash. You can have cash on delivery. You can also have a convenience store collect, which is also similar to in Taiwan. So when you're designing for or developing for something that is in catering to international users, make sure to actually localize how the users will pay and collect the good if it involves physical goods. Another localization aspect is the device and connectivity. When you're designing for emerging markets specifically, you have to adapt to the local devices, screen sizes, and connectivity. So in one of my projects, I was designing for users in Philippines, and I had to look up what are the top used devices, screen resolutions and connectivity for the Philippines. And we found that for Smart, which is one of the top telecommunications company, users are using really small, low-end smartphones like the Samsung, and it's very different. Like people who work in tech like us, we probably have an iPhone. If not, we have a high-end Android phone. But users were using something completely different. So here, the mock-ups or prototypes are not going to use on our own phones. So what I have to do is I have to actually find a low-end phone, like what the user were using, so I can actually try out if the designs are working. Have to test it on low connection speed to see if the users have like the designs will result in a seamless user journey. And what's funny is that I was based in Singapore while designing for Philippines, and this phone was discontinued in Singapore. So it couldn't even buy it in Singapore. We had to ask a team member from abroad to send us to lend us this phone. So if you can, definitely research what are the top devices and test the connectivity, so then you can make sure that what you're designing developing here works the same locally. Now, with all those localization insights and market like market research and things like that, why companies want to design for users around the world is to dominate the world, right? Like you want to become this best company that is in 60 different markets, and you have a really strong presence in every continent. Now here I like to give some tips. This is through via years of designing for users of different markets, and some of the things I find, aside from all the things I mentioned, these will be quite helpful to your company. And this is my observation for what makes a company successful when they're going international. So number one is to have a diverse team. As I was previously mentioning, it is really valuable to have people in your team that can speak different languages, so then that you can do the research in the local language. I find that sometimes a company doesn't think about diversity as much as as the others. And a team of diverse backgrounds actually can think about the product from multiple perspectives and generate more creative ideas than a homogeneous team can. Take, for example, the world's largest toy company. They talk about how a company culture rich in diversity is key to business success. It allows us to better understand the business opportunities in various markets around the world and develop products that resonate with consumers in diverse cultures. So there's definitely gains in diversity, and especially if you want to be international. And second thing I definitely enjoy and I like to do, and while a lot of us cannot do at the moment, so I'm pretty sure that in the near future we can, and maybe some of us, located in some parts of the world, you can now, and that's great for you, is travel and do ethnographic research if you can. So ethnography research is to be deep in the ground and really observe the user, their lifestyle, their choices, their behaviors, and interview and ask them about their actions and motivations and things like that. And if you can't be on site for a really long time, even try to be living like a local for a week is a really great way to learn and experience the local culture. So when I travel, I like to stay at least 5 to 7 days, if possible, even longer, just to do research on the ground, talk with local people, and join the local community, and to really learn about the local culture. And that is so much more valuable than doing research in front of your computer. Of course, I know the current situation, but yeah, when you can, this is definitely valuable to design for users of different cultures. And the Momondo has done a study. They have found that travel really helps to bring more positive view on the people of countries visited, positive view on other cultures in general, as well as more positive view on differences and diversity. So if you want to dominate the world, make sure your product and service is loved by users around the world, build a diverse team, and travel. And I think that the travel and the research will help us to become more aware and more embracing of the culture differences, even if they are so different from us. And one last but obvious tip is to not use Google Translate or any other machine translation in your localization process, even though it's an obvious one. But I actually see this all the time. I actually see what looks very obviously like machine translated copy on the websites. So if you use translation, what might happen? I mean, I cannot see a reaction here, but I think it's pretty obvious what might happen if you use the wrong translations, right? And I also have one example that is actually a real world example. A company here in the Netherlands, they were going to do business with a Chinese company. So they were based in Holland. They were going to do business with Chinese company. So with the best intentions, they designed the business cards in Chinese to try to, make friendly connection. And so, but as a native Chinese speaker, I can see a few issues with this translation or with this attempt to localize the business card. So the first thing here is the CEO, when his name is Mr. Vish, in translation, it became Mr. Ko. So not really sure where it came from. Perhaps now he has a new Chinese name. The second part is that the phone numbers are in a very weird format that is hard to remember for a Chinese person, because in the Dutch phone number format, you put a space in every 2 digits. But that is actually not how it's done in Chinese. And in fact, I would suggest to use an international phone format. And also the M doesn't really make sense because M stands for mobile in English. But if they're translating the card into Chinese, then it's probably better to use a phone icon instead of M. And lastly, I'm not sure if it's obvious on my screen, but the part on the bottom, the best from Amsterdam, is translated into better be from Amsterdam. So make sure to have a local or native speaker to go over the designs or go over what you develop to make sure that we are not making these mistakes in front of our important business partners or users. And I like to close my presentation with this is to, my goal here, of course, not everyone is designing an international product or service, but at least I hope that with this presentation, we can be inspired to think about users of different cultures and their needs and what we can do to actually design for someone that has a different culture background than us. So Erin Meyer, the author of Culture Map, which is also who did the research for the video, to quote her, she says, "The way we are conditioned to see the world in our own culture seems so completely obvious and commonplace that it is difficult to imagine that another culture might do things differently. It is only when you start to identify what is typical in your culture, but different from others, that you can begin to open a dialogue of sharing, learning, and ultimately understanding." So with that, I'd like to thank you. Gracias. Merci for your time being here in Laracon Online today. So thank you. If you have any questions, you want to follow me on Twitter, I will share more cross-cultural UX insight there. Feel free to do so. Thank you and have fun today.
Thank you. That was absolutely amazing. That was so perfect, and a great way, I think, to kick things off here with an early slot. And one of the things I really love about Laracon Online is we do, these kind of talks that aren't just code, and there's so much more to software than just the code. So I think this talk really kind of brings that home for sure. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian.